Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight for our January meeting. As is our tradition, I'd like to start up by mentioning some of the officers, board members, and other volunteers who make all this possible. I mean, their efforts are greatly appreciated. Start out co-president Jim Hammond, Vice President Helen Wilson. You simply can't say enough for what she does. And we have board of directors, Gene Binstock, myself, Toby Chapman, Audrey Glickman, Jim Hammond, Tony Indovina, Helen Wilson, our treasurer, Evelyn Young, President Emeritus, Michael Ehrman, our membership coordinator, Stanley Klein, programming coordinator, Todd Miller, and our web designer, Janine Michael. Start out, it should be noted that we depend on dues and donations to survive. And it's a very easy and inexpensive organization to join. Membership entitles you to a very informative and well-researched monthly newsletter. You can find the application on our website. And since we're a nonprofit, dues and donations are tax deductible. During the past few weeks, our schedules really come together, and you can find the details in the coming presentations on our website. Next month, our topic will be the newly published book, Engineering Pittsburgh, and it'll be presented by Todd Wilson, who authored the chapter on Pittsburgh's bridges. We're also working on a number of other projects. The 2021 Squirrel Hill calendar, which is a joint effort between us and the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition. It's still available at a discounted price. And it's filled with a number of historic photographs of the area. You can find copies at Little Shoes, Classic Lines, the Amazing Bookstore, or you can order it from the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition website. We're also continuing to promote the restoration of the Neal Log House. It's located in Frick Park, and it's estimated to be 240 years old, making it the oldest dwelling in the city of Pittsburgh. We're also looking for information about a riding stable that was formerly located along English Lane near Frick Park. If you have any firsthand knowledge, please contact us at our website. We'd love to hear from you. The topic of tonight's presentation is nearby Homewood Cemetery. Our presenter is Lisa Speranza, who's currently Director of Development for the Homewood Cemetery Historical Fund, and he's currently writing a book about the cemetery. So without further ado, I'll pass this over to Lisa, and she can start the presentation.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I appreciate the invitation to attend tonight and appreciate everybody that took the time to join. It seems like we have a lot of interest in this, and that's, important to me, because I think that whether the individuals we're going to discuss tonight are famous or lesser known, everybody deserves to have their story told and their name remembered. So a little bit about me. I actually grew up in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood, and many, many years later, ended up volunteering with Allegheny Cemetery, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. My family was buried there, and in researching the stories at Allegheny, I ended up co-authoring my first book, which was a collection of stories about individuals buried at Allegheny and photographs from the archives that are there. And then that kind of led into me also kind of researching and learning about some of the history of the Homewood Cemetery. And also wanting to include stories about the people and the histories that I've found that were there as well. So the book that we're going to discuss tonight was published in 2019. And it is just a small snapshot. There are many people there, and, a lot of different stories that we weren't able to include. But, you never know if there's a volume 2 in the future. Maybe we would love to have some more information. So With that, though, I am going to run you through just kind of a snapshot of the founding of the cemetery itself, and then we'll discuss some of the people that are there as well. And all of these were taken specifically from the Homewood Cemetery book that we just released. So with that, I'm actually going to pause my video feed so that you can better see the images that we have here, and then we will go ahead and get started. So give me one moment here. Okay. Okay, so let's see here. The first image that we have to present for you tonight is the original Homewood estate, which was on the grounds where the cemetery now stands. And this estate belonged to the family of Judge William Wilkins. Construction of the estate that you see here began in the 1830s, and it actually remained on the grounds after the cemetery was founded in 1878. Ultimately, the mansion was demolished in 1924. And the area at the time was very prominent. There were a lot of other well-known families such as Frick, Westinghouse, and Hines that had homes in the area. Whenever Judge Wilkins passed away, he and his family were originally interred at Allegheny Cemetery. It was the premier burial ground at the time, and the Homewood Cemetery did not yet exist. And then after the Homewood Cemetery was initially opened again in 1878, Judge Wilkins' family was removed from Allegheny, brought back over to Homewood, and at that point in time, they were buried in the first mausoleum on the grounds, which is just inside the gates on the Dallas Street entrance. For those of you that walk our grounds often, you might recognize this barn. This is an image that was taken from a series of glass plate negatives that are in the cemetery's private archives. They were commissioned around the early part of the 20th century, and they include a number of different things such as construction of the grounds and a lot of images of some of our first sections as they were laid out, which you can kind of see on the hilltop up above the barn in the background here. This image of the cemetery's barn dates to 1912, and it shows the structure just as it looked shortly after it was completed. The building itself was erected in 1909, and it was an integral part in the care and maintenance of the cemetery's grounds and landscaping efforts throughout the years. It's one of the primary things in a cemetery is trying to maintain all of that, and so this, certainly is a very fundamental structure in doing so. If you already happen to have a copy of our book, you might recognize this as our cover image. It was selected because it kind of best represents some of the overall landscaping of the cemetery at the time. Homewood was designed as a lawn park cemetery by architect Hamilton Shepard. And there's still currently, many of you are probably familiar with the naturally spring-fed pond that we have right within the South Dallas Street entrance down from the current administration building. Ponds such as this were man-made, and there were a number of them that once dotted the grounds. They were designed to emphasize the sky, the light, the air, and the reflections, and at the same time sort of blend into the natural landscape in which they were built. So the pond that you're seeing here in this image was located in our section 20. It no longer exists, but if any of you are familiar with the Posner Memorial and Pond, it's not very near where that area is located today. So this is a rather unique image. This is also from the collection of glass plate archives that we have. And this one is dating to the early 1920s when it was decided that a new administration building would be built on the location of our prior administration building. The one that you see here was the first administration building, and when the new one was being laid out and designed, it was going to go on the same spot. So this particular building was raised and elevated and actually rolled across the street, where it currently still resides to this day and is a private residence. So as we're looking at this, I'm going to flip over to the next slide here and give you a little bit of a better image. This is certainly a rarity. The person operating the crane in this last image here is actually a female crane operator in the early 1920s. Her name was Jane Shilliday, And she's the stepdaughter of John Ikley Jr., who was the man who owned the construction company that was responsible for moving that first original office over to the new location across the street. And I have to apologize in advance if I'm saying any of these names wrong. I am certainly open to correction and welcome it so that we make sure we have that right going forward. So after that portion was done, the new administration building, which is the one that you will see if you visit our grounds even to this day, that administration building was completed in 1923. And the group of gentlemen that you are seeing here is the board of directors that was present at the time that that new administration building had been completed. So as you're seeing these individuals here, some of the names were very prominent in the city of Pittsburgh, very notable. And the first row closest to us is Charles Dickey Armstrong, James Ross Mellon of the Mellon banking family, George Davison, and then directly in the row behind them are Howard Noble, W.W. Blackburn, William Ray, and Daniel Clemson. This image that we have here is another unique image from the collection of glass plate negatives that we have. And adjacent to the current administration building, you will find the cemetery's chapel, which is pictured here. The chapel has served to the community for nearly a century and has served to host different events, including weddings and memorial services. Many of you have probably seen programs there on Founders Day when we have that. And then obviously funerals as well, one of which is pictured here from the early 1920s. Kind of a large focal point of the chapel, if you've ever been there in person, and certainly in this image, is this large stained glass window, and you can see the sunlight streaming in from behind it in this photo. The stained glass window was designed by George Green, and then it was crafted and installed by Rudy Brothers, which were a stained glass designer in Pittsburgh. If you have been to our chapel at any point in time, you will see that it looks very much the same as when it was first constructed, and it kind of speaks to the history and the legacy of the Homewood Cemetery throughout the years and even going forward. This is a particular favorite of mine, actually. So then, as now, a big concern is ensuring the sanctity and the security of the grounds. There are a lot of lives and souls that we are responsible for protecting at Homewood. And so there are security guards that are designed to, just keep track of everything on the grounds, even to this day. But the gentleman that we see pictured here is John Swanson. And in the early 1930s, our security force would patrol the grounds, which include hundreds of acres, by motorcycle. And he is pictured here alongside his 1932 Indian Chief motorcycle and sidecar. And I'm not sure if you can make it out on the slide, but emblazoned on the door, it says Homewood Cemetery Police. So that'll give you just kind of a little bit of a brief history about the founding of the cemetery itself. And then going forward with our presentation here, I'd like to introduce you to some of the people that we have buried within our grounds. Again, please forgive me if my pronunciation is a little bit off here. But the first person that I'd like to introduce you to is Bertha Lam Fight. And she was a pioneering woman who was one of the first female graduates from Ohio State University. And when she went into this program, she sort of followed a family legacy. Her brother Benjamin was an electrical engineer. And so Bertha enrolled at Ohio State University, and she received a degree in mechanical engineering at the time, with a focus in electrical technology. So at the time when she did that and received that degree, it actually made sure that she was the first female electrical engineer in the entire country in the United States. Her brother Benjamin at the time was employed with Westinghouse Electric, and he brought her work to the attention of his supervisor, who was Albert Schmid. And he was very impressed with the work that she had done in college, her study and her acumen, and he hired her as an electrical engineer. And in that capacity at that time, we're talking kind of right around the turn of the century, she helped to advance the Westinghouse technology at a time when electricity was becoming a vital source of power for the country. So she was there at a very critical time, involved in a lot of the projects that still have, implications today in the different technology that's available. However, with all of that said, in 1905, she married, and it was customary at the time for her to give up her career with Westinghouse in order to attend domestic and family duties. So her career ran about 12 years. And, at that point when she got married, she no longer worked for Westinghouse as an actual employee. However, she was often used to consult on different projects, and still certainly had input into a lot of their research and technology that they were developing. But her contributions were not quite over. She had a daughter in 1910 who eventually became a physicist. And her daughter, Florence, worked with the U.S. Bureau of Mines. So kind of continued the legacy of being a pioneering woman in the science fields long after her mother. Many of you from Pittsburgh will recognize this family's name. Please allow me to introduce you to the Benedum family. Michael Late Benedum, who you can see on the far right-hand side of the image here, was one of the best-known oilmen in the Pittsburgh area. He served as one half of the partnership that formed the Benedum Trees Oil Company. And after he married his wife, Sarah, on the left here, the couple had their son, Claude, in 1898, who is the adorable little child here pictured in the center. Claude would later join the military, and he was stationed in Washington, D.C. during a time when it was overtaken by the crippling 1918 flu epidemic. Sadly, that caused the loss of his life. And in October of 1918, at the age of 20, Claude died as a result of this flu. And in honor of his legacy and his memory, the family later established the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. That was established in 1944 and has been a critical force in supporting the community ever since that time. Michael and Sarah, the parents, both survived their son Claude, and they passed in the 1950s. As you're walking through the Homewood Cemetery, you may be familiar with their large private family mausoleum, which is able to be viewed in section 14. The next gentleman that we have here for you tonight spent much more time behind the camera than he ever did in front of it. This self-portrait is of Charles Teeny Harris. He captured life in Pittsburgh's Hill District in the early part of the 20th century. And in addition to capturing photographs just of everyday life, he also had a very impressive resume. His photographic collection includes legends such as Muhammad Ali, John F. Kennedy, Errol Garner, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn, Thelonious Monk, Walt Harper, Ethel Fields, Dizzy Gillespie, Ella Fitzgerald, and Etta James, among others. So his visual legacy also included, like we said, everyday images that were of funerals and weddings and numerous family gatherings. And there are still many today who were the subjects of some of those photographs. So it's, kind of an ongoing legacy that we are so fortunate to have as part of the Homewood Cemetery and our city overall. So his photographic collection now resides with the Carnegie Museum of Art. And one of the cameras that he used in his work is now housed in the collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and was a gift from his relatives Charles Harris and Beatrice Harris. I would be remiss if I did not mention that much of his work was done for the Courier, which was a very well-known publication in its day and was so critical just in kind of capturing this segment of the community and, not only using Harris's work, but the work of many others just brought to light a lot of things that were so critical and crucial for the up and coming civil rights movement. And, even to this day, it's an important record that we have here in the city. So this image that we have here shows William H. Brown and his family. The Browns were operators of one of the largest coal shipping businesses of the time on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. And the family was very well traveled. They enjoyed a lot of different exotic trips, such as this one, which included a visit to the Sphinx and the Egyptian pyramids around the end of the 19th century. you will probably know it better by seeing the influence that that had on the design of their final resting place, which is, of course, the pyramid that everybody is familiar with. This is in section 14 and dates to about the 1920s. This image is one of the ones that we had included on those glass plate slides from the cemetery's archives. So here I would like to present to you a gentleman that actually is not buried at our cemetery, but is commemorated there. If you're not familiar with the term, this gentleman, William Flynn, who is pictured in the center of the front row kneeling down, he is commemorated with a cenotaph. So in the event that a person who has passed may have been serving in war or lost at sea, in some event where the person is not specifically buried, but the family wishes to remember and honor them, they will place a cenotaph, simply meaning that there is a stone there, but the person may be buried elsewhere. So William Flynn is one of these individuals, and he's shown here with his crew. William served with the U.S. Army Air Force's 386th Bomb Group, 555th Bomb Squadron in World War II. On October 5th of 1944, Flynn was piloting a B-26 Marauder called the Yankee Gorilla, which is what you see pictured here. And they were on a covert mission to attack a German military installation during the Second World War. As the plane was flying on its return from the mission, it suffered a mechanical failure in the skies above Raton, France. And in the process of that happening, Flynn looked forward as he was piloting the plane, and he realized, unfortunately, that there was a crowded schoolhouse in the middle of the daytime when it would have been filled with children, directly in the path of the airplane. So as he kind of looked around trying to decide what to do, he realized that there was an abandoned farmstead that was just before the school. And with only seconds to make the decision, Flynn intentionally grounded the plane in order to save the lives of the school children. However, as he did so, it resulted in the loss of his own life, and several members of his crew were killed as well. But in making that selfless decision, he saved the lives and the future generations of every single child that was tucked away within the walls of that schoolhouse, which of course had a lasting impression on this small community. Songs are still sung about him in the region to this day, commemorating his bravery and his selflessness. And Flynn was actually buried in an American cemetery in France, and not brought back here, which is why the family commemorated him with the cenotaph in the family plot in section 14. Flynn may be familiar to you if any of you have heard of William Flynn Highway. This is actually the son of the senator that was named for. He had a sister, Mary, who was the founder of Heartwood Acres, along with her husband, John. So the family name may be well known, but William's story is not one that I've run across very often. So I wanted to make sure that we shared that with you this evening. And last for tonight, but certainly not least, we have Daisy Lampkin, who many of you, I hope, are familiar with. She's an amazing woman, and she might have been best known for her work with the civil rights movement, but she was also a devoted suffragist. Daisy helped to develop branches of the NAACP and the Urban League here in Pittsburgh. And then she also served as the vice president of the Courier newspaper, from the aforementioned Teenie Harris also worked for. And she used that platform to give a much needed voice to issues that were affecting the African American population at the time. And in addition to just focusing her attention on a local scale, she also dedicated her efforts on a national level by serving as the National Field Secretary for the NAACP. And in 1938, she was part of something pretty powerful and monumental. Lampkin recognized the potential and the promise of a young attorney, and she nurtured his involvement with the NAACP's Legal Defense Committee. The attorney you might be familiar with, his name was Thurgood Marshall, and he would later win the Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education case against racial segregation in public schools. After that, he was actually a Supreme Court justice. So Daisy kind of had a lot of influence on that. And, who knows where we would have been without that today. So some of the people that I've mentioned tonight for you are included in our Homewood newsletter. So that is available. If you are interested in receiving it, you can call our office, which is at 412-421-1822, and we're happy to mail one out to you. We also have this particular newsletter, and the last couple issues of our newsletter are available via our website. So we can send out that information for you as well if you would like, or you can just go to thehomewoodcemetery.com. And lastly, I would just like to say that all of the information that we presented tonight was gathered from our publication, which you can see here. It's available now. Definitely a labor of love. This took about 1.5 years to put together, and was written kind of during a difficult personal time for me. So it was, kind of an honor to be entrusted with telling the stories of these individuals and being able to help to share and remember the legacies that they've left behind. The book itself is 128 pages. And the images that are contained within were from the cemetery's archives. Many of them have not been seen by the public before they were included in this publication. We specifically included chapters that detail the cemetery's history and some of the better known industrialists like the Hines and Frick and Mellon families. There are stories about military heroes, several of whom sacrificed their lives to protect our country. There are some amazing women in a chapter that's called Daring Dames that just sort of details, again, people whose names may have kind of been lost to history, but that should be remembered. So many artists and sports stars like Pie Traynor and a million others, and just little known individuals. There's an entire chapter dedicated to people that might not be famous, but who still have really incredible stories and, picked from different events in Pittsburgh's history that I want to make sure are remembered. So if you are interested in receiving a copy of the book, it's available again through the cemetery's office. And I will flip over to the next slide in a second here with my email address. You may note it says Allegheny Cemetery. I serve as the Director of Development for both historical organizations, both at Homewood and Allegheny. So, either way, I have information. If anybody's interested, you can feel free to email me. If you pick the book up in our office, the cost is $23.99, and we can ship it out for $4 shipping. Most importantly, any proceeds from this are going to benefit the Homewood Cemetery Historical Fund. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And it's so crucial. The funding for these goes back into educational programs and, just kind of ensuring upkeep of the grounds and, care for a lot of the historical monuments that are there, as well as just protecting the collection that we do have for future generations. So with that, I am happy to open it up. If there are any questions or anything else that I may be able to answer for you or look into, I would be more than happy to do so.
Okay, I guess at this time I would ask any participants who want to ask questions to unmute themselves, find your microphone and unmute.
I have a question, Lisa. Is there anywhere where there's a complete list of people that are buried there? I understand the book, there's some of the famous people, but is there any place that has complete listing of people buried there?
Can everybody hear me okay? There we go. There's not one master complete list. However, what I would direct you to do if you're looking for family members or if you are trying to see if an individual that you might be researching is at the cemetery, if you go onto our website, there is a section that says burial records, and you can type in anybody's name and it will pull up information. A word of caution, sometimes older names may, have been spelled with a PH instead of an F. I just spoke with a woman today who had a Rudolph in her family, and it was, spelled a little bit different depending on where you look. So try a couple of different variations, or, always please feel free to call the office. We're happy to help if we can, and looking up to see if somebody's located there, or if you stop by the grounds, we can get you a map so that you can better find who you're looking for. It's a big place, 200 acres. There's over 78,000 burials. So there's a lot to look for there, but we're happy to help if we can.
Thank you.
Sure.
How many remaining plots or vaults are there in the cemetery?
I don't have a specific number. However, there's still enough space in the cemetery to accommodate and through the next century. It's still very much an active cemetery while at the same time being historic. So we still conduct burials every day. We still have available plot spaces. And again, if it's something that you're interested in, the cemetery's main office can put you in touch with one of our family counselors that could provide some more information on available burial space.
All right, thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Homewood. Offline.
Hi, Lisa. It's Charlie Stewart.
Hello.
Hi. My great-great-grandfather, William G. Johnston, is buried there. There's a Johnston plot.
Yes, sir.
And nearby, well, right in that plot, Sarah Neil Johnston is buried there. Neil spelled Neil. And you might know we are working on the restoration of the Neil log house.
Okay.
And I was wondering if you had looked into the Johnston family or the Neil family.
I have not had the opportunity to, but I would absolutely welcome that. I'm constantly, looking at old newspaper accounts and trying to just find out any information. It really, this is personal for me. I don't know these people. I will never know these people, but I think it's important to recognize their names and try to kind of keep that alive for future generations. So that being said, if any of you here tonight have stories that you would like to share, my email address is on the screen. Please, please, please reach out to me. We would love photographs or stories or anecdotes or just anything that can contribute to the overall legacy of Homewood. But as a personal family genealogist for my own family, I know how valuable that is when somebody takes just a few minutes to make sure those stories are continued. So please, for the Neil family, I would love to have some more information on that. My email address here, just reach out to me and we're happy to continue that conversation. Absolutely.
Lisa, I know you talked about when the cemetery was opened, but do you have graves from before that, from people who were moved back there? I know you mentioned the Wilkins, and I'm interested, what would be the oldest grave in the cemetery?
So it may not necessarily be the first. We run into this at Allegheny too, and especially because Pittsburgh at the time, in the early part of the 1800s, really only had a few small burying grounds, and as the city developed, then again, you would see that people would kind of be interred when a new larger burial ground like Allegheny opened, which was 1844. And then Homewood opened in 1878. And at the time when Homewood opened, a lot of the more prominent families were moving out to the East End. And so they would kind of relocate their family members, maybe from Allegheny or from smaller family cemeteries, out to Homewood when it became available. It was closer to home. It was at the time outside of the city. So yes, certainly you will see, dates of death that predate the opening of the cemetery. I know at Allegheny, we have Revolutionary War soldiers that are buried there that were moved from the Trinity lot downtown out to Allegheny. At Homewood, I believe our earliest burials there are from, I think, around the 1830s or 1840s. Again, the cemetery opened in 1878, but dates of death that would have been around that time.
Lisa, if I may jump in here, I researched Turner Cemetery, which is on Beechwood Boulevard near Browns Hill Road, and several Suches, that's S-U-T-C-H. They were taken out of Turner and put in Homewood, and they even took the tombstone. So you have our tombstone too.
Yes. That's actually a very interesting point. So sometimes the families would do that and sometimes they wouldn't. It's sort of an aside from Homewood, but there was a tombstone found in the library in Lawrenceville a number of years ago, and nobody could figure out how it got there or what it was doing there. And it was broken. It wasn't very legible, but that's exactly the situation that happened. Was that when Allegheny opened up, there was a very small churchyard behind what is the library now. And they moved those remains over to Allegheny, but they left the tombstones. In your case, it sounds like they took them, but So this tombstone kind of was just left in the library until somebody came along and did the research and figured out who it had belonged to. So sometimes we will see that those stones removed. Sometimes larger cemeteries were able to accommodate the smaller ones. So they may have taken a whole group of remains from different places and reinterred them when these new cemeteries opened. So it's kind of an interesting history. It's an interesting glimpse into some of the organizations that used to be in the city of Pittsburgh that are no longer existing either.
Lisa, I guess this is Tony Indovina. I have a question, just having grown up around the cemetery. It's just such a beautiful
Yes.
piece of land with the trees. Could you talk about the effort to keep it like the Arboretum that it is, or how that piece of it developed?
Yes, absolutely. So again, it was kind of designed with that as a focal point. A lot of the land that was there prior to it being a cemetery was forested. And as you walk through now, you'll see many specimens that are notable, a lot of tree plaques that were involved. The cemetery was recently designated as an arboretum within the last few years. And so that is very critical to preserving that. As you walk through, there's certainly all the notable monuments and everything else. But if you really kind of turn your gaze, you'll see so much of the natural landscape that's integrated with that as well, and critical to just the overall aesthetic of the cemetery, the overall historic nature. We have this beautiful weeping willow down by the ponds that you're probably familiar with if you've seen different shots of the cemetery or have walked through there. But yes, the Arboretum designation was significant. It just kind of helps us to protect and enables us to educate the community about what a wonderful resource that is for us to have here. It was very unique in that at the time it was designated, there were not a lot of cemeteries nationally that were on that list. Homewood was only the 23rd, I believe. And Allegheny was also designated after Homewood as an arboretum. So we actually have 2 cemeteries in the Pittsburgh area which are designated as arboretums, and that's a pretty significant thing to have.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you asking.
What is the ownership structure of the cemetery? Is it owned by a trust or a group of individuals?
They're nonprofit organizations. So, like I said, we still have active burials that are going on there. But then the cemeteries themselves are considered nonprofit organizations.
So Lisa, it's Charlie Stewart again.
Hello.
Is Barbara Berson still on?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was wondering if Barbara Berson was on. We did some articles for Shady.
Yeah, I
Hi,
am.
Barbara.
There she is.
We did some articles for Shady Ave magazine in the spring of 2016. And one of the features I loved about Homewood Cemetery was as you're driving in the entrance from Dallas, you look over your head right between the two posts, the 2 entrance posts, there's a wire. And that wire was put there because it connects the 2 gates, and it maintains the Eruv, if I have the right pronunciation.
Called an Eruv, yeah.
The Eruv. And it's one of the fascinating features of the Jewish community, because Orthodox Jews, what I wrote, are prohibited from carrying anything from sundown on Friday to nightfall on Saturday unless a unified non-public domain has been created. A symbolic physical boundary exists that encompasses most of Squirrel Hill, delineated by connecting telephone poles, electric wires, walls, and fences. So that wire helps connect that fence that runs along Dallas to complete the, how do you pronounce it, Barbara?
Eruv.
Eruv.
Sure. That's very interesting. I was actually not familiar with that. Please, my email address here on the screen, if you have anything on that, I would love to include information like that in our archives. It's part of the story and very important to us.
Well, there's actually now a Jewish section in Homewood Cemetery.
There is, that's correct. Yeah, the cemetery has, different areas, and, it's always been open to anybody. We have the first Chinese cemetery, east of the Mississippi. That dates to around 1901. And then you'll see Jewish sections and Muslim sections, but it is open to anybody that wishes to be buried there, in any part of the cemetery that wishes to be buried there. So, while certainly we do have different sections, it's just absolutely open to anybody at all.
Before, I know we're wrapping up a bit, and I just wanted to, if you don't mind, Lisa, just wanted to go back to the announcement that I had intended to make at the beginning, and it was about, completely off the subject, but Selznick, that name's familiar because his cousin was the Selznick who was in Hollywood, but he told me that he rode horses in a riding stable on English Lane. And he couldn't have been the only one. So some of you might remember the Selznick riding stables or the Beechwood riding stables. So if you have stories, please send them to me. Use the Squirrel Hill Historical Society contact, because we're tracking this down and it's very interesting. It was located where the Mount Royal houses are. So anyway, send me your stories. Okay, that was like an advertisement. Back to the main speaker.
I'm curious if anybody that's on tonight here has any relatives that you feel their stories may or may not be familiar to us already. If you have anybody famous that you were related to that's buried there, there, like I said, there are a lot of very well-known Pittsburgh families, but by no means are they the only stories that we're interested in. I think sometimes, we sort of walk past a headstone and, sometimes they're the smallest stones that have the biggest stories to tell. So, like I said, when I did this book, I made sure to include an entire chapter on people like that, including one of a child named Ida Spittle, who I think was approximately 2 years old. She is in the same company as the Fricks and the Mellons and the Hines families. Again, she lived a very short life, but she lived. And I think as you walk through Homewood, take some time. The pyramids are amazing. The mausoleums are beautiful. The stained glass is world-class. But at your feet are so many more stories that are so important. If we don't remember them, I don't know that in 100 years anybody will take the time to do that. And we're, closer to those stories now in time than people will be 100 years from now. So that's why I kind of take the time to put in the effort to do this. This was a volunteer effort. I had not yet been brought on board with the cemetery, and I did it because I love this and because this matters so much to me. So, all of you here tonight, it mattered. You showed up, and I just wanted to extend my appreciation for that as well.
I heard that the topography was different originally from what it is today.
Yeah, it was, it's laid out as a lawn park cemetery, so they did change that somewhat. You'll see different styles of cemeteries. So if you're familiar with Allegheny, you'll see very ornate mausoleums that were once surrounded by fences and gates. And when they did Homewood, it was kind of designed in a later period. So with a lawn park design, you would see sort of like a central monument that would have like a family marker surrounded by some of the smaller family stones. And they sort of incorporated the open landscape and vistas a little bit more. It was a little bit of a different perception in how it was designed. So certainly, what had once been a forested area surrounding that initial slide that I showed you of the Homewood mansion, very hilly and very densely forested. At the time when the cemetery was founded, those grounds were opened up a little bit to kind of encompass both burial space and a particularly designed an intentional layout for those grounds.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lisa, one of the most poignant places, I think, in the cemetery is the Civil War plot.
Yes.
But it is in not good condition. Are there plans to restore it?
Certainly, it's something that is an ongoing effort all around the cemetery, including that plot and many others. And especially, a very small portion of that is things like sales of this book and the Historical Society. That's a lot of what we do, is to generate funds to help with that and apply for grants and work to preserve those things. It's an old place. There's, a lot of opportunities there where we can certainly try to address it. And it is an ongoing effort to make sure that these historical grounds are preserved for future generations as well. But yes, that particular plot it's remarkable. It's one of those places that you kind of walk through and you can only imagine the stories that these people have to tell.
The mansion of Judge Wilkins that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, how did he make his money? I would think it wouldn't be from being a judge. Did he own land, or did he inherit it?
That I am not sure of necessarily if he inherited it. He was from a very prominent Pittsburgh family. And at the time, a lot of them were involved in things like banking. And, this was so early in Pittsburgh's history. The mansion that he built there was actually in the 1830s. So, not too long after Pittsburgh was founded. So I'm not exactly sure where the family's prominence came from. But he, along with a lot of other members in Pittsburgh at that time, sort of rose as the city came to prominence. They rose as well. And you'll see even a lot of the families kind of intermarried with one another.
I also think he owned, he served in the United States government. I think was he Secretary of State? I forget. He was like really high up in the government for a while,
Yes.
as ambassador. So I think we had a talk on Wilkins. I can't quite remember. But anyway, he was very prominent in the government.
I was trying to see offhand here if I had the information written down for you. Let's see. Yeah, I can definitely check on that. It is a good question. I'm not quite sure where that came from for him.
Okay, do we have any other questions here, or? Okay, I'd like to move on then, and I want to thank Lisa. It's very interesting stuff.
Thank you.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Absolutely.
Like there's so much more out there that we could learn about. And speaking on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for making a presentation tonight. And I hope anyone that has information will pass that on to you.
Yeah, I would love that. I appreciate it. And like I said, please, if we can help with genealogy research or just general questions, always my email address here, or feel free to give the office a call. It's a two-way street. We're happy to learn, and we're happy to help provide that information if we can.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for coming. Welcome, and see you next time.
You're
welcome.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.